On today's History of Politics, we're going to talk about the executive branch, and that is Article 2 of the Constitution. Article 2. Remembering that we have three co equal branches, co equal, they all have the same weight. Three co equal branches of government, which is the legislative, which is the Congress, okay, the lawmakers, executive, which is the president and vice president and the cabinet, which executes the laws that Congress makes, and finally the third, which is the judicial branch, which is the courts. Okay, and the courts tend to deal with disputes between the states and disputes with constitutional law. Basically, that's where the Supreme Court comes in. Is something constitutional or not? Okay. Article 2 speaks about the president. Now, this we got to get into a little bit because Trump has lied about this. So let's be clear. Section 1 of Article 2 indicates thus it says, executive power is vested in the president. Key term, executive power. Executive. What is executive power? It's the power to execute the laws, not make them, but to execute them. Now, Trump says Section 2 says that he could do anything he wants to do. He can make laws, he can adjudicate cases, he can deport whoever the hell he wants, he can disappear citizens off the street, he can have his revenge and everything else. That's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says executive power is vested in the president. Executive power, not legislative power, not judicial power. And you would need all three. That's what monarchs have. That's what tyrants have. That's what dictators have. They have, I can do whatever the hell I want power because they control the courts, the Congress, and the executive branch. They can make the laws, they can adjudicate the laws, and they can pass the laws. They can enforce the laws. They can execute the laws. Tyrants have that. Dictators have that. Authoritarianisms have that. You know what? This is that whole unitary president idea that is not constitutional. The unitary president idea is that the president has complete and total unyielding power. That's false. That's not democracy, which, by the way, in this republic, as some of you like to call it, we are a republic that has a democracy where there is no unitary sovereign. Okay? Section 2 further states that he may serve his term in office is 4 years. The Constitution further tells us that he's only allowed to serve 2 terms, which is 8 years. That's what the Constitution says. And that was actually put in place after FDR because FDR did a 3rd term and he was doing so great after the war, they wanted to give him a 4th term. But because of his health and so on, wasn't going to happen. Okay. So the next part of Section 1 deals on how a president and vice president is elected. Contrary to popular belief, and it's a movement that's going on right now, I believe 28 states are involved in it already, where they want to get rid of the Electoral College. The Electoral College is actually a racist-based maneuver, and here's why. In the southern states, there were populations, of course, but there were less people that were able to vote because the rest of the population was slaves, and slaves could not vote. So the way around that was to create the Electoral College. And what this does is you have electors from each state, commensurate to the entire population of the state, not the actual voting population. but they're commensurate to the entire population. So that gave the South a little bit of a come up, because where in the North you didn't have slavery and everybody could vote, in the South, where slavery was prevalent, only if there were, say, 100 people on the plantation, maybe 4 of those people could vote. But with the Electoral College, an elector is granted enough votes, or the electors of a particular state are granted enough votes representative of the whole, the entirety of people living in that state. So if we go back to that original thought, if there are, say, 100,000 people in that state, even though 95,000 of them are slaves, but the electors would have votes commensurate to represent 100,000 people. And this part of this is why that they want to go change it to the popular vote. They want to eliminate the Electoral College because the popular vote is more accurate. And the Electoral College angle kind of cooks the books on the whole thing. But according to Section 2, the electors come together and they assign their votes to the winner of a state. So, for example, if Trump wins more votes in Arkansas than Kamala Harris, then all of Arkansas all the electors of Arkansas get together and say, we're for Donald Trump. And then what'll happen on January 5th or 6th in the new year after the election, they come together at Congress. The Senate president opens all of the envelopes of the electors and counts the votes, certifies the votes. It's really not an official act per se. It's more ceremonial because the votes are already there. They're already in an envelope from the state, certified by the governor, that these electors did this, okay, based on the votes of that state. But the Senate president opens up the envelopes. He puts it into the record that this state has gone for this candidate, and that's it. Okay, that's basically how the Electoral College works, and that's how the president and vice president are elected into office. Section 1 also allows for the president to be compensated. It gives him a salary. But here's the rub to that. His salary cannot be raised or lowered during his time in office. If his salary is $400,000 a year, he cannot turn around, nor can Congress for that matter. They cannot turn around and raise his salary to $450,000 a year or $500,000 a year. It's $400,000 whether he's in there 4 years or 8. Okay. Section 2 is, and by the way, one other thing about the electors. The electors cannot be senators, congressmen, or anybody holding an office of trust. And the requirements to be a president, as such, you have to be at least 35 years old. That's your minimum, 35 years old. You have to be a United States citizen, whether you're born here or you're naturalized. You have to be a United States citizen. You have to have lived here 14 years as a citizen. That's it. That's the qualifications to be a president. 35 years old minimum, U.S. citizen or naturalized citizen, and lived in the country 14 years. Section 2 outlines the fact that the president is the commander-in-chief, as it says in the text, of the Army and Navy and all militias. But that was because at the time we did have militias when the Constitution was written. Because remember, the redcoats are coming, so we had to protect against that. We had militias. But we did have an army and a navy. But actually, the text really means at this time period, he's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Because remember, militias were outlawed. So he's commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Now, as well, the president can make treaties. the president can nominate ambassadors, ministers, consuls, cabinet members, and judges. Whether any federal judge, including up to and including the Supreme Court. But there's a caveat, and it's by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. By and with the advice and consent of the Senate. Meaning that anybody that the president nominates for a certain position, they have to be vetted by the Senate. The Senate has to approve them. He can't just say Mark Carter Pierce is going to be our ambassador to Canada. Can't do it. It has to go through the Senate, which being Mark Carter Pierce, I would have to appear before the Senate and go through a confirmation hearing. And the advice and consent, or advise and consent, is that the main thing is the consent point. Consent means they approve. That's what it's about. I'd have to pass their advice and consent period, and I'd have to be approved by the Senate. So that's where that comes in. And that's how the cabinet, ambassadors, federal judges, up to and including the Supreme Court, president can nominate whoever they want, but it has to go through the advice and consent of the Senate through a Senate hearing. And once they consent, they confirm the person. That's the consent, and they can start their jobs. Section 3 requires the president to give a State of the Union address. He has to give a report to Congress every year. And normally it's televised, so we get to see it. Okay? We get to share in the report on this country. God knows what the next State of the Union address will look like. I'm sure that Trump is going to say that the state of our union is strong and he's had the best year than any other president, and so on and so forth. I'm sure he's going to do that and totally ignore the fact that he took health care away from a couple million people and SNAP benefits from a bunch of kids. I'm sure he's going to do that. He's going to claim again, probably by that time it'll be up to 12 wars that he stopped, and he should be a Nobel candidate. And he sent the troops into the states, even though that was illegal. And he changed. The bottom line is that what he's supposed to do is report to the Congress on the State of the Union and make recommendations to improve the State of the Union. My recommendation to improve the State of the Union is for him to resign and his whole damn cabinet, starting with RFK Jr., but that's a horse of another feather, and that's a tale for another day. That's Section 3. And finally, Section 4 deals with what do you do when a president has broken a law and it's time to remove him? Well, everybody in America should know this right now, but according to the Constitution, he has to be impeached. He has to be impeached by the House. And then he goes through a trial with the Senate. And in that trial, which is headed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he can either be convicted or not convicted. What can he be brought to task for? Treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, that term is a little vague, but misdemeanors is kind of, high crime would be considered a felony. A misdemeanor is something on the lower end, which normally is like less than a year in jail. Your first time shoplifting, you stole a couple of packs of cupcakes out of Walmart and they caught you, misdemeanor. Basically because of the value of what you stole. And it's your first time, misdemeanor. High crimes, on the other hand, Oh, I don't know. You violated posse comitatus. That could be a high crime. Treason. Like when you took boxes of secure information to your home when you were no longer president and then showed it to people like a billionaire from Australia. You divulged national secrets to a person from another country. Yeah, that's treason, pretty much. That's treason. In any event, that's how that's dealt with. Another thing I want to mention to you is in Article 1, they deal with the succession, which means that if a president dies, and we also have that in amendments too, it's still there. If a president dies or can no longer perform his duties, or he resigns, or he is removed, the vice president takes over from there if both are out of there for some kind of reason, the vice president or the president, or both. If both of them are gone, then it's up to the Congress to select who will serve as president. I might want to add for you that Section 4 not only applies to the president and the vice president, but it applies to his cabinet as well. If they get impeached and convicted, they all got to go. Every last one of them. They have to go. So if we impeach Trump for a treason, Vance is going to get caught in it, and so is his whole staff. So is the whole cabinet. They're all gone. Trump gets convicted, they're all done. They're all done. Guilt by association. And what a great day that'll be for America. Anyway, that's Article 2, dispelling the myth that a president is all powerful. Wrong. There is no unitary executive in the Constitution. There is no all-powerful executive. He's vested with the power of the executive branch, but not the legislative or judicial. He cannot make laws. He cannot preside over guilt or innocence. He can't make rulings. He can't rule by fiat with executive orders. Contrary to what Trump says, he could do whatever the hell he wants. No, he can't. That's a fact. And that goes not just for Trump, but anyone who is duly elected sitting in the Oval Office. Assuming that anybody else that gets into the Oval Office was duly elected. Not like this constitutionally disqualified nightmare that we have now. Yeah, I said it. One thing you're going to get here is the facts. Plain and simple. Anyway, if you learned something today, comment, but keep it clean, respectful. Respectful discourse is always welcome. But if you don't, be prepared to get what you give before you get blocked and deleted. Otherwise, like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.